Okay, I think we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to say welcome everyone for today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about managing zero trust and tenet number 5, integrity controls. And on today's webinar, we are very excited. We have Mark Allers and Chase Cunningham. And Mark, I'm going to let you go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Jackie. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Allers. I'm the Vice President of Business Development at SimCorp. Just two housekeeping issues. First, if there's any questions through the presentation of today's presentation, please put them into the chat section there, and we will get to that to the end of the presentation. And second, if anyone would like a copy of either the slides or the video, I will put my contact information in there to get a copy to you. So today I am joined by Dr. Chase Cunningham. Chase is here to present on how to manage zero trust and tenet number 5. So a little bit on Dr. Cunningham. Dr. Chase Cunningham is the Chief Strategy Officer at Aircom Software. Known in the cybersecurity industry as Dr. Zero Trust, Dr. Cunningham has extensive knowledge in all aspects of enterprise security. Prior to joining Aircom, he held the position of Vice President Principal Analyst at Forrester, where he tracked and covered all aspects of enterprise security, including zero trust trends, technologies, and frameworks. Creator of the Zero Trust Extended Framework and a cybersecurity expert, Dr. Cunningham has decades of operational experience working in various capacities, including the NSA, U.S. Navy, FBI Cyber, and other government mission groups. Chase was also a Forrester analyst, tasked with managing and developing their Zero Trust portfolio of accounts and leading the research in that channel. Additionally, Dr. Cunningham held several positions at the U.S. Navy, including Director of Threat Intelligence and Armored Director of Cyber Analytics for Decisive Analytics and Chief Cryptologist Technician. He is also the author of Sinja Series and Cyber Warfare, Truth, Tactics, and Strategies. Please welcome Dr. Chase Cunningham. Thanks, Chase.
Hey, thanks for having me. So this is going to be some new content for me. So buckle up, I would say, because we're going to run into some interesting content here. So let me make sure that the internet gods are with me and that I can share. And hopefully you're seeing slides. Let me know when you do.
Got it.
All right, cool. So I spend a lot of time with organizations trying to get people to understand like what is zero trust and kind of how this is not something that is so foreign to you. I think it's great that we're talking about integrity controls, and I'll get into that here in a minute, because I honestly, the first time Mark and I met in person at Carnegie Mellon, they started talking about one of the missing things in ZT. And I was like, well, we haven't missed anything. This is all we do all the day, every day. And then they ran through their presentation on the issues around integrity in the context of ZT, and a light bulb came on for me. So I really think that that's super important, but I want to ground everybody in that we kind of live in a ZT way, whether we think about it or not. And let me gravitate you to what I mean here. Right now, you're probably thinking, oh, they got some drunk guy to come present. I promise, I'm totally sober. So I'm kind of a tinfoil hat guy, but I would also say that those people that are tinfoil hat people, we typically survive. Paranoia is not paranoia for no reason, unless you're one of those just insane people that thinks that lizards are running the government or whatever else. But paranoia, being aware of your surroundings, being cognizant of the threats that are present, and maybe in some instances putting on your tinfoil hat, actually equals being smart. I live out in the country. I take care of my home. I work, to make sure that I am able to defend myself, those types of things. Am I paranoid? Maybe more than a lot of other people. But do I freak out about things because I think that they're there? No, I'm just aware, I'm cognizant, and I'm able to respond to threats if a threat should present itself. And I think that there's a scenario that can help us understand that we live in that sort of ZT world, or at least we should. So let me present an interesting sort of problem, right? This has never happened, but it probably could. I don't have a pug, I have Pomeranians, but I could totally see my nephew coming over, seeing the Pomeranian or pug and deciding it would be funny to stick him in the toilet. And then suddenly I have a plugged toilet, right? So I just thought this was funny because they pugged the toilet. Regardless, if that happens, I'm going to have to call a professional to come help me figure out how to fix this problem. Now, I can unclog a toilet, but I don't know how to get a pug out. Regardless, if I need professional help, there's kind of a series of things that I will do to bring this stranger into my home and fix a problem. But along the way, logically, I will do some other things to verify, validate, maintain control, and make sure that I'm operating in a safe fashion when I introduce this risk or threat from outside of my environment, which is what we do in the IT world all day, every day, millions of times a day. So if we follow down this rabbit hole a little bit further, what's the first thing that you do when someone has pugged the toilet? Well, if they've pugged the toilet, you're going to find a plumber, right? Somewhere in the local area. You're probably going to have to find a vet too, but we're going to find a plumber, and we're going to call that plumber and say, look, I have a dog stuck in my toilet. I need some help figuring out how to get this animal out of here. Please send a professional. Now, this is near where I live, so I obviously had to black some stuff out because I don't want you people knowing where I live, because like I said, I wear the tinfoil hat. But anyway, I'm going to call a plumber. The plumber, first thing I'm going to do is pick up Google. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to go look. I'm going to find something. I'm going to use the star rating, right? We all use Yelp and those types of things to figure out who's the best plumber. And then I'm going to call them and I'm going to say, send this plumber to my house. Here's the problem. I'm going to verify and validate that that person or that plumbing company exists. I'm going to look at the reviews to make sure that there's, some validity to their services. And then I'm going to know that they're in my general area and kind of what specialties they have. So I'm doing my research and I'm understanding what I need to solve my problem. I need to get a pug out of the toilet. I'm calling people that can come do that. The next thing that I would do is I would wait and see when that plumber shows up. Now, if this guy shows up at my front door, immediately my tinfoil hat system goes off and I start asking questions. Well, number one, where's your company logo and badge? Why don't I see a company van? You just showed up with one tool, which is concerning because there's probably more tools needed to remove this animal from the toilet. And B, why are you 12 years old? Like, you're a plumber. You should be someone that's been around for a while. I would expect you to have kind of, thick, muscly hands and probably a dirty beard and that type of thing. And you're going to come with a van with tools, whatever else. So the first thing I would do would be to verify and validate that this plumber is actually who they say they are. I would get a hold of a plumbing company. I would probably call them on FaceTime and say, is this the person that's supposed to be here? Make sure that they say it's right. And then we go forward. But I'm not going to just trust that because some dude in a truck shows up at my house with one tool in an outfit, that he's the guy that I'm going to let into my home where my family and I live. So that's a bit of an issue. I got to deal with that, but I'm validating. I'm not necessarily super paranoid. I'm validating, verifying, and making sure that I control the situation. It could just as easily be this guy that shows up. If you're not familiar with who this is the dude that played Ed Kemper, who was a serial killer back in the 70s that showed up to people's houses and did bad things to them. If I don't verify, validate, and maintain control of that, and I let this guy in, which Ed Kemper was 6'8" and well over 300 pounds, it's going to be a bad day for everyone involved. So you need to make sure that you have positive control and you understand with total context who this individual is, where they came from, why they're there, etc. It's not hard for someone to set up a fake plumber system or a fake plumber email address and whatever else, and then come to your house when they get a call and then murder you and bury you in your own yard, that type of thing. So again, the paranoia, it's smart. It's keeping me alive and keeping me safe and taking care of my family and maintaining my home, which is my four walls, what I care about, what I value. Now, on top of that, when that individual who I validated and said, I understand that they're supposed to be here, comes into my house, I'm going to let them know that I have some internal controls to make sure that I can keep an eye on them and that they are being watched while they're doing what they're doing. Is it because I have an inherent lack of trust in humanity? Probably, but that's a whole other issue. But in this personal instance, I just don't know this person and they're doing something in my house. So I'm going to let them know I have an internal control to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. And if things get out of band, bad things will happen. One of those is my Doberman. He is trained for bite work. He's a great dog. He does what he's supposed to do. And he will let that person know when they come into my home, look, you go to the sink or the toilet, you fix the sink or toilet. I'm going to keep an eye on you the whole time. And if you do something outside the bounds of what we've agreed to, Dad's going to let me loose and it's going to be a bad day for you. He's an internal control. He's being applied in the context of ZT because I don't know what's going on here. And I'm maintaining command and control of the system. If the Doberman doesn't work, I also have additional levels of controls that I can release, which is my 2 evil Pomeranians, right? Those are my alert system. If he starts trying to move laterally within my house, the Pomeranians will go nuts and they will let me know that someone is moving around my house without my knowledge, without my express consent. And then all I got to do is holler at the Dobie and problem solve. So again, I've verified, validated, maintained control of the system. I know who's going on. I have total context. I have external controls, which is my door, which is making sure that I know who they are when they come here. And I have internal controls that are the tiny evil dogs and the big Dobie, who will make sure that they are keeping an eye on what's going on and that I have an ability to remove the threat should the threat present itself. And then lastly, when all this stuff is done, I'm not just going to take it for granted that the guy has removed the problem from the toilet. In this case, it's a pug, but I'm going to go verify and validate it myself. I'm going to make sure that nothing has changed that wasn't supposed to change, that this guy didn't come into my house. He was supposed to work on my toilet, but I go look in my bathroom and all of a sudden my wife's jewelry is missing, or all of a sudden something else has changed. Something's different than it was before because I don't know exactly what this person's been doing. I have other things to do during the day. My dogs are not going to care necessarily that he moves into the jewelry box or whatever else because it might be in the bathroom. I've got to go check it myself. And if something weird has occurred, I need to know who that company was so that I can reach out to them and go, hey, your person was in my house. Now I'm missing my watch. We need to fix this. You guys owe me something. I'm reporting you to the Better Business Bureau, et cetera, et cetera. So I think just in the grounding people in the reality of you live, or at least I hope you live in some sort of semblance of a ZT lifestyle, that this makes sense. You live in a world where hopefully you verify and validate and maintain control of situations. Hopefully you have controls both externally and internally. Hopefully you validate what's going on and make sure that it's supposed to take place. And lastly, when something does occur, you inspect it and look around and make sure that nothing weird has changed so that you have an ability to deal with that problem. This is a ZT mindset. This is what we do all day, every day. Again, I hope you do this. It's not really that different when we think about computerized systems. We do the same things, we just do it at a much bigger scope and scale, and we do it with systems that are much more ethereal in nature. So let's get into a little bit of that now that we've got off of my Chase is crazy and he's worried about people coming into his house to fix the plumbing thing. I could fix the toilet, by the way, just so you know. So when we talk about trust in an IT system, what is trust and why can't we just assume it? Why is it bad to assume that you trust something? Trust, and this is actually provided to me by the folks at SimCore, this is a great definition. Trust in IT is the assumption that a user, device, application, or service subject, I like to think of them as entities, is who or what it claims to be. It should access the resource it's requesting. It's configured and behaving in an expected way, and then it's free from compromise. And then lastly, it's allowed to take the actions that it is trying to take. If you assume any one of those, you're opening yourself up to risk and compromise. If you think about the adversary's life cycle, that's what the bad guy wants you to do. I have been a red teamer for a long time. I worked in the US nation state sort of side of things, if you will. That's what they're hoping that you do. I hope that once I get into a system that you trust me to do things. I hope that I can use a systems account to do things within that system. I hope that there are passwords and shares and whatever else that are available to me, because I'll eat your lunch. If you allow me access to the resources by default, it's going to be a bad day for you. If you're basically expecting that there's no weird configuration things taking place, you're probably opening yourself up to compromise as well. If you consider those things and you really put controls in around those things to remove those trusted relationships, you are beginning to take back control from the adversary. Ultimately, in cyber, this is not about perfect defense. We talk about this in ZT. There is an assumption of compromise. There is an assumption that the system is actually already hacked. If it's already hacked, what do? We should apply controls around these things to remove trust. And if you think about the Lockheed Martin kill chain, the MITRE attack system, all those other pieces that people wrap their head around when they're talking about threats, all we have to do is get in the middle of that with removal of trust, and you begin to take back control. So again, this is where things really translate well. This is a lot like I was talking about with the plumber coming into my house. It's kind of the same thing. I don't know who or what that is. I don't know where they came from. So I'm going to validate and make sure that that's right. I don't know what resource they're trying to access immediately, especially if they're trying to do things outside the bounds of what we're supposed to be doing. I don't know if they're sick, if they're healthy, if they're a bad person, if they're a criminal, whatever. And then finally, I want to make sure that the action that they're trying to take is something that I will allow. You are allowed to do this and nothing else, and I'm going to put a bound and a time horizon around it. You do those things and you remove the adversary's ability to be continually successful. Integrity, so you've got trust, right? What is integrity? And this is kind of a definition that I manipulated a bit myself. I know that the SimCorp folks are working on an academic definition, which is awesome. Integrity is the assurance that digital information and assets are uncorrupted and can only be accessed or modified by those authorized to do so. Integrity in the personal world, like my grandfather always told me, is doing the right thing when no one's looking. However, in the digital world, it's much more in line with this. If you have integrity in a system, you are sure that nothing strange or anomalous has occurred to that system, and therefore it is operating with integrity. Now, what that also means in the inverse is if something has changed that was not authorized, everything is under question. Integrity has been compromised. We have to figure out where that occurred, and we need to have a means to go back to a trusted or integrated, or integrity fulfilled state. We're never going to operate in a trusted manner, but we can operate where we think that there's integrity in the system because we know that the baseline has not changed. Change isn't a given. Anomalous change is a risk and a threat. There are further definitions you can go into when you start thinking about integrity. And this is why when Mark talked about this at Carnegie Mellon, it really kind of opened my eyes to this whole thing of like, well, there are different pieces of integrity within systems. There are different pieces of integrity that we should consider when we talk about zero trust. There's entity, there's referential, and then there's user-defined integrity. I'm going to run through a couple of these without totally wording them to death, but the logical integrity, a logical integrity is just basically, is it operating the way that it should? Is it operating logically? A lot of times people will say the system did something weird. That's outside the bounds of logical integrity. Go figure out what's going on there. If you have a good baseline, you'll know when something anomalous occurs. Entity integrity, nothing is modified on the entity itself. Is a thermostat now doing things that a thermostat didn't do a week ago? Is a file now being accessed ways that it wasn't accessed before? All those things for the entities, and the entity can be anything. Could be me, could be a thermostat, could be a phone, could be a file, whatever, the entities themselves. Referential integrity, how is it being used? Are things being added or deleted? And then lastly, the user defined, which are additional rules and constraints that are implemented in accordance with an organization's specific needs and aren't covered by the other three. So in other words, if someone sets something up in a trusted, or excuse me, a state to begin with, if something changes, that's a violation of that user-defined integrity. Or if my organization has rules that say this must operate this way, and then something different occurs, that's a violation of user-defined integrity. But the important part is to really understand what's going on and know that there's a violation of integrity taking place, and then be able to deal with the compromise of integrity within that system. This is not a one-off problem. This is a problem of scope and scale. Integrity, interestingly enough, when I was thinking about what Mark said, it's actually mentioned repeatedly throughout NIST documents. It's mentioned throughout a lot of different guidance. If you've ever taken one of the CompTIA courses, or you've got a certification for some of this stuff, there's definitions of integrity in there. Usually it's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability side of things. But this is the NIST definition. I think this is particularly applicable when we really wrap our heads around this. The quality of an IT system that reflects the logical correctness and reliability of the operating system. You change something or do something that is different from the bounds of what it was supposed to be doing, that's a violation of integrity. The logical completeness of the hardware and software that implements the protection mechanisms. If the controls for a system that are not manipulated are changed, why did that occur? That's a violation of the integrity of the controls. So this is an integrity issue that goes up and down the stack, all the way from the top of the OSI model, all the way to the bottom. And the consistency of the data structures and occurrence of the stored data. If something happens with the data itself, a lot of times we'll have good controls around the network. We have good controls around access. We have good controls around X, but the data, the workloads, those types of things that are more dynamic and more fluid, if something has been manipulated there from the base, that's an issue. That's an integrity problem that we have to deal with. And again, ZT, really, as far as the tenants go here, the number 5 tenant needs to bring more of that into the conversation. We've done a really good job of wrapping up the majority of the rest of them, but integrity, as it's used in this context, is something we need to explore even further. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those types of things, those are interesting, but in cyber and IT, like this sort of side of it is something that I think we should wrap our heads around as well. Cybersecurity, good operational capability is really about the foundational stuff. I mean, the stuff at the bottom of the stack is what's super, super important. The stuff at the top is interesting, cool, sold a whole lot of that stuff, but it's not actually typically going to remove the threat that we have from most of these systems, malicious actors. If anti-malware scanning was the end all be all for cyber, we would not have a single breach ever anywhere. How many folks on this call right now are running some form of anti-malware scanning, right? I mean, you've got it. Go look at every breach that's occurred in the last 20 years on any enterprise system and find me one that didn't have anti-malware scanning available. You won't, because it's all there. So we just accept that that is probably not going to be the fix that will solve all of cyberdom. If we think about the bottom of the stack, and I do this every Wednesday on my live streams, I go look for misconfigured systems. If you have a misconfiguration, if it's not hardened, if there's vulnerabilities that are associated with it, that is where the failure begins, and it works its way up to the top. From the bad guy's perspective, by the time they get to the anti-malware scanning and they're worried about whether or not you picked up their malware that they've written, it's too late. Really, the core stuff, the workload protection piece, will do more to remove the ability for an adversary to be successful than all of the stuff at the top. And like I said, there's my internal warning system, right? Someone just came to my door. So there they go. They launched. The big guy is just waiting to see who comes in the door. The little dudes are alerting. I call them my wireless doorbells. They charge all day long, easy peasy. Following back to this, really, this is where we gain a lot of control. This is where we gain a lot of ground. If you think about the stack of technology, you could take the OSI stack and you could take this risk-based hierarchical stack and stick those two together, and you would see where the corollaries are of which thing would help with which control. Interestingly enough, you can also take compliance regulations, you can map them through these things, and it becomes almost a Rosetta Stone so that you can understand which compliance needs will help solve which problem, which will remove or reduce which type of threat or exploit. This is something that's key and core to ZT, and it also fits in well with the whole integrity side of this question, because if those things change from base, if a violation of integrity has occurred, then I have a need to move and fix that problem. And it's also easier, if you think about it, to fix things further down in the stack before they become a problem rather than later on at the stack. If I'm trying to deal with stuff at the hips and vulnerability shielding and anti-malware system scanning stuff, ask how well that went for the guys at Maersk and Norsk Hydro when they got ransomed. Not doable. It's always better to be left of boom than right of boom. If you're trying to deal with this problem and you want to really understand what's going on and have an ability to fix the issue, which is what we're all trying to get to, it's not about treatment of the symptoms. It's about an ability to understand what's going on, survive the onslaught, not be the slow gazelle in the space, and have an ability to go back and fix the issues. Because for some reason, we've mostly forgot that in IT systems and corporate networks, we should be able to roll stuff back. If something gets compromised, if something goes sideways, why can't we roll back to a trusted good state, or not a trusted, because trust is a bad word, but in a state that has not been compromised? That's something that we should be able to do. For some reason, that gets lost on everybody. So I think that this is super interesting for us to consider when we're thinking about the controls we need to actually deal with the problems in the space. Otherwise, we are missing a key capability that will help us get past it. If you're able to do that, if you're able to go back to known good, then you actually are removing the adversary's ability to be successful almost writ large. Again, I accept compromise. I know that a system is going to be hit. I know that someone's going to get past an endpoint. I know that they're going to get past anti-malware, whatever. But if I can roll back to a better state to where I was before, then I'm good. I can live with that. However, I have to have an authoritative baseline of what good looks like so that I know where to roll back to. If I don't have a good baseline, then anything that I do roll back to typically could be compromised as well. So if we have a really good baseline, we'll understand what's going on. We'll have an ability to know where the threats are actually operating, and we know where we want to go back to. If you ever watched any of those time travel movies, whenever they try and roll back, they want to make sure they roll back to the beginning of the time that things went to hell. They don't want to roll back to some weird skew that occurred. If you've watched, Time Cop with Van Damme, you always want to go back to the beginning. You don't want to go back to a tangent on the timeline. There needs to be a means of identifying and protecting data from unauthorized change. This is inside of that types of integrity that I talked about. At the end of the day, all cyber ultimately is going to be about protecting data of some kind. What's the phrase Willie Sutton used when he used to rob banks? Why do you rob banks, Mr. Sutton? Because that's where the money is. Why do you go after IT systems, and why do you hack systems and do corporate bad guy stuff? It's because that's where the data is. The data is the new currency. So if you're able to have a good command and control of the data and keep people from messing with the data, you're winning in that space. I'll let you have my endpoints all day, every day, if I can keep my data from being messed with. Is it going to make me miserable and probably lose some sleep? Sure. But in the context of the corporation, if my assets are unaffected and my data is unaffected, am I still operational? Yes. And that's a good place to be. And then lastly, a mechanism to roll back unauthorized changes not blocked at the source. If I can roll back and I can go back to that timeline to the beginning of the Van Damme flick before we had the mullet and everything else, I can do stuff quicker, better, faster. I can live with that. One thing that we talk about for the folks that practice zero trust is accepting compromise, but also being able to move past compromise. The best way to move past compromise is to go, yes, we had this thing occur. However, we have rolled back to an instance that we know was good, and we'll operate from there. And now we're going to go remove the rest of the threat as its presence on the system. And if you follow along with what's occurred with ransomware, with big time nation state hacks and those types of compromises, it wasn't that there was a compromise that took place. It was that once that compromise took place, everything became part of the compromise activity. If you're able to roll back and do it smartly, especially if you can do it at a granular level, you can continually go back to the place where things are right, and you can remove the adversary's ability to be successful. That's what it's all about. And then lastly, making sure that you can verify, we call this monitoring, that those things are doing what they're supposed to be doing. If 1 through 3 are operating correctly, light is green, catapult launch is good to go off the carrier. If 1 through 3 are not good, we don't know where we need to go, we have an issue. And everyone out there is monitoring everything all the time. You won't find a business that's not logging things for the sake of logs because of a log. So you've got the information, you just have to be able to use the information and telemetry to act and to actually remediate and fix the problem. Now, I think zero trust is a strategy that we all need to embrace. I think it works in life. I think it works in IT systems. We see a global shift going on around this. I was just on a call with big time DoD organizations this morning. I was on a call with people in Africa last week about ZT. So the strategic value proposition here can't be overstated. And again, I think just if you say ZT is this weird sort of cyber thing that I don't know if I can get to and whatever else, if you really live in any sort of world where you're taking care of your own protection and you value your own safety, I think if you really wrap your head around it, you'll understand you kind of operate in a ZT fashion. And if you're doing that, you're safer than the next person down the street. And that's what this is going to wind up being at the end of the day, is my business will survive because we've operated in a strategic fashion that makes sense. Someone else's might not. And that's bad for them, but that's good for us. This is running in front of the zombie horde. If someone trips and falls, I'm not stopping to tie their shoe. I keep on going. So having the capabilities in place, dealing with the reality of the space, and having controls that will help you operate in a known good fashion really do enable a ZT strategy. And this translates from the physical space to the cyberspace if you really approach it that way. And at that, I'll open it up to questions.
Chase, I appreciate it. I love the animation. This is the second time I've listened to you do this on a specific topic, and I just love it. Love it. Love the animation. Have a few questions, a few of my own and a few in the audience here. One of the ones that I have for you is in September 21, the administration released a draft zero trust architecture guidelines. And the agencies have until September 2024 to meet the 5 zero trust goals. Given the government's track record of implementing IT strategies and compliance mandates like CMMC, is this time frame realistic?
Well, I think the time frame is probably not realistic for a full role implementation for what they're going for. However, if you look at the recent DoD strategy publication, which came out, I think the day before Thanksgiving, they do talk about that they're looking at it, and it says at a minimum a 5-year implementation plan, and I think that's probably more realistic, but it also says in that document that they think that this is probably going to take longer. They even talk about all the way out to 2027, 2030, those types of things. So I'm glad that the government is being realistic about it. And they're also telling folks like, look, it's going to take us time. I mean, they're dealing with one agency I know alone has got 4 million endpoints. They're taking their time and really wrapping their head around it. And it's fair for them to say we need a decade to get to that space. It just is going to be that way. Those of us in the space, we know that it's not turn and burn and you get this done the right way. So is it realistic? I don't know that it's not realistic. Is it going to happen in that time frame? Probably not, especially since we all know the government doesn't necessarily operate at warp speed.
Okay, good. Thank you. Second question. What's your take and perspective on 800-207, NIST 800-207, and the likes of CISA and DoD coming up with their own reference architecture? We're getting a lot of folks from our end just asking, why is there 3 reference architectures? Why doesn't everyone just go right to 800-207? Why does it? It's like there's a compliance mandate for everything that's known to be out there, but yet 85% of all compliance requirements are the same requirements. They're the same controls. Why DISA and DoD? Why make it complex?
Well, number one, Beltway bandits is one reason why it's complex, because that's how those guys make money. But number two, the thing that people should take away from those different reference architectures really is that it's actually good that you have these big organizations putting out different approaches to the problem, and each one kind of saying, this is how we would do it in our particular instance. And like we say all the time, this is a strategic thing. So if CISA's got something over here that's their reference architecture, and DISA's got something over here, and then there's NIST with its thing, take those pieces and make them your own. You won't find any compliance mandates for ZT yet. And there are those of us that are consulting at the highest levels trying to keep them from doing that, because we don't want compliance to be what you chase to hit ZT. We want you to enable the strategic approach and make it your own. Honestly, I don't think that there should be a prescriptive, thou shalt only do this thing for ZT, because that skews the value of a strategy. But it's worth noting that there is, anytime the government puts something out, publication, there's been a lot of brain work and a lot of work behind it. So use that as a principle to kind of guide your thinking and approach, and then leverage that to bounce your questions off of.
Okay, fantastic. Next question. This was a topic that you and I both listened to General Toohill at Carnegie Mellon when we gave our presentations. What's your take on Memorandum 2131? The description is improving the federal government's investigative and remediation capabilities related to cyber security incidents. Now, you and I either read it. I know you've been a participant in the context of the content of that memorandum. The way I read that, it looks very much along the lines of investigative, but not remediation. I mean, it essentially has a lot of componentry of SIM in it. And this was one of the topics that I presented to General Toohill, and I'd love to get your take on M2131.
Yeah, I think that's a good reference document for people to think about when they're talking about the hunting sort of side of things and looking for threats within a system. If we do the ZT thing and when we say this system is probably already compromised, 2131 was kind of written to wrap people's head around how would you go and dig to find out where those rats are hiding in the dark corners. But it was never meant to be a remediation or a defensive, particularly focused document. So I wouldn't get hung up on that. The reality of it is ultimately we're trying to get to a space where we're more proactive and preventive than we are reactive and trying to find the adversaries when they're already there. But we have to start with a approach of someone's in my home, I've got to go find out which closet they're hiding in, and let's work our way towards that. I personally for the record, I'm not a fan of SIM technology. I think typically people wind up getting SIM and it sort of becomes a thing that they put blinky lights on and it winds up in the sock. But most of the time, and I think there's reports to validate this, SIM is not used for operations. It's used for analysis. So that I think that can get lost in the mix too.
We're finding something very similar. Matter of fact, when we talk about integrity data, as you defined it already, it's probably one of the most valuable pieces of data as opposed to aggregation of a bunch of logs. Because at the end of the day, integrity data is binary, right? If a port opened, it opened. If a configuration changed, it changed. So we're finding a lot of the SIM vendors reaching out to us in droves right now saying, I need your data. So it supports exactly what you just said. Ties into the next question I have. How do you separate kind of the hype from the fact when looking at zero trust, given there's I think our mutual friend here, Richard, is tracking 2,900 plus security companies. And I try to correlate that from, the old, 2 decades ago when, there was hundreds and hundreds of IT service management companies. Now they're down to, literally maybe 3 dozen and that's it. We're sitting at 2,900. How do you discriminate, out of that 2,900, who actually brings the value to this, to this architecture, the ZT architecture? Because it's clear, not everyone, it's square pegs and round holes.
Yeah, well, a lot of people will take a square peg and chew on it, right? I mean, they'll nibble at it till it fits that round hole, which is not the right way to go about it. I think what we do begin to see is there's a bit of a coalescing in the market around some of these systems becoming kind of centralized. There's a lot of platform-ish, portfolio-ish type plays, which are going to sort of drive those numbers down a bit. But what I remind people when I do workshops with them on everything else is, if you're looking at a technology, think about it in the same way that you do about your business technology. If it's not something that solves a particular problem better than the system you had before, why would you bring that in? And then if it doesn't help you either optimize budget or age off something that's going to drag you down, why would you use that? So rather than just continually buying things from those 2,000 vendors and hoping eventually I've spent enough money, I'm good to go, that's not the right way to go about it. You don't do that in any other facet of your business. It's the same sort of approach. The value proposition for a security technology is that it makes your system more secure and operate smoother, not that it does more things and cost you more money and is another cool tool.
Perfect. Okay. I have 3 more, and Jack, you might have a couple left that are still on queue here. If someone asked you, Chase, what's your definition of system integrity assurance or integrity management? Because right now there's this thing out in the out in the industry called FIM, file integrity monitoring. But at the end of the day, FIM is just detecting change against a baseline. It has no context whether to tell you, is that good or a bad change, right? And there's dozens and dozens of companies that do that. What would you, if, like when we were at Carnegie Mellon, a few months back, if I asked 20 people definition of integrity or integrity management, I'm going to get 20 different answers. Your answer is very intriguing and very important to me because you've lived this as opposed to someone that's just, right out of college or just got their certification and they think they know what the I is in the CIA triad. What do you think? What's your definition?
I think my definition is pretty simplistic. Honestly, it's just if there's a change from base that introduces risk that was not previously aware of or known about, then that's an integrity, I guess you'd call it integrity issue, and then start dealing with it. And it might be a file, it might be a port, it might be a user, it might be an access cred, it might be machine operating, whatever it is. If it's operating differently than it was before and no one knew why that occurred in some context, that makes me question the integrity of that particular transaction. Great,
thanks. 2 more questions on my end here. One is something that you and I've discussed in the past. Docker and Kubernetes, where and how do you see it fitting into the zero trust architecture? We know this is this is a hot topic and maybe a little bit overlooked from a security perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a Docker or Kubernetes expert. I've been doing a lot of reading on it, and I just did a study around Kubernetes and ZT that I'll publish that stuff soon. But it's really interesting because by the very nature of those tools, they are ephemeral. Like they come up, they do their thing, and they go away, or they do this and then they do that and then they go, and they're just transitory in nature. So the reality of any transitory asset in my mind is there is no way I could possibly put up a perimeter around something that doesn't exist more than maybe a few seconds. If that's the case, and that's a given, then I have to do something that will make me, that will allow me to apply a control down to that sort of burstable dynamic resource. And that's where ZT and these types of controls can come in. Now, are you able to say unequivocally that there is a baseline for something that dynamic? I think that's a really hard thing to do. But any baseline in that context of a ZT approach would be better than a perimeter where you think you've got things taken care of.
Fantastic. My last question before I turn it over to Jackie to answer any other incoming is, in your perspective, is there any glaring issues or holes of opportunity for a bad actor to exploit in a ZT architecture? You and I have had this conversation and around integrity, and hopefully I've kind of been able to gain your trust and attention on this particular. Is there something else that is out there other than integrity that's being overlooked that we got to put a little we got to shine a light on?
Yeah, I think the thing that's becoming more and more interesting to me is everybody talks about risk calculation, and sort of that's something that we're trying to constantly equivocate. I'm hesitant to say that we've figured out what risk actually looks like in the context of a ZT or a non-ZT environment. However, I think when we look at things like integrity, when we look at a zero trust approach, those types of deals, I think ultimately we'll get to a place where we're able to come up with a pretty useful risk calculation based on the resources that are allocated to enable the ZT approach. Because like you were sort of hinting at, if you're an organization that has a full ZT environment in place, or as close to it as you can get, you know what your risk profile is, because everything else that's kind of not part of that risk quantification is tangential. And I'm okay with tangential risk. I'm not okay with systemic risk. So I think we'll get there. I don't think we've got enough research into that particular aspect yet. But for me, it's the risk piece of the equation. And I think if you remember too, when we were at Carnegie Mellon, I even introduced a model that I think is a variance of the old CIA triad, where it's risk, trust, and access instead of confidentiality, integrity, availability. The more I think about it, I think integrity actually fits into that. Maybe it's not a triangle, maybe it's a, I don't know, square or something, not nearly as sexy as a triangle, but I think that there's something there.
Great. That's all the questions that we had. Chase, as every time we have these kind of conversations, it just sparks more, more interest, and we're going to get this problem solved. In my opinion, it's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this. And at the end of the day, once we solve this problem, one of the things that I had a conversation with General Toohill about was, and love to, as kind of a parting comment here, is he said, we're going to get this solved. It will get solved through this zero trust architecture. And zero trust is nothing more than a rearrangement of a bunch of controls. Those same controls have been there for years. Now it's just the rearrangement and the priority of those controls to meet the objective and alignment of a zero trust architecture. And love that, because I'm a controls guy. But he made a comment that was rather interesting. He said, Mark, we're going to solve this. And we're going to solve it with componentry of zero trust and all the various tenets. But he said, once we get this solved, integrity becomes one of the critical components, because now we've solved the software and the hardware element, but what's left is what he called the wetware, which is the human element. And it's only at that point that the humans can screw everything up from an internal perspective, whether it's malicious or accidental. Any parting comments on that relative to?
Yeah, I mean, what's the old saying, right? The most secure system is the one a human never touches. Unfortunately, we can't operate in that way because we're all using systems every day, all the time. But I think if you're really looking at it, you can have a really good system, and one person with the wrong intentions can cause a whole lot of problems. Does that mean you don't inherently trust your people? No, but that means you should continue to apply controls around them and be able to understand what they're doing and if there's context to a potentially risky or threatening activity. Another, quick takeaway too is people seem to have a misconception that if you're operating on my network, that it's part of your network or whatever else. If my company is paying you a salary and you're operating on my network, I have every right to engage in controls and monitoring and those types of things as well. So I'm not being draconian. I don't care about what you do on Facebook, but I need to know what's going on in my system so that I can defend it, so that I can continue to pay you. And I think that that's something that needs to be more of that conversation as we continue to employ controls in these new systems.
Perfect. Well, Chase, as usual, I appreciate it. This is, I'm sure this will be enlightening for a lot of folks as we start to begin to define what the I means. As I've told you before, we're working with SANS on that definition, as well as recently had a conversation with SEI. They too want to help participate in that, as they're the ones that define, whole DevSecOps. So, why not have their involvement in it? So, it's a journey. It's a marathon, not a race. And it's broadcasts like this that'll help kind of set the stage of, understanding what are those critical components inside, either an architecture or an organization or compliance. And it's rather interesting if you take all of the by definition of integrity and those controls, 30% of, by definition of those nine controls in one workflow actually map to all of the best practices, 30% on average. So it's an education, and I thank you for helping, push the message and get it out there. And we are going to solve this. But it's going to take a little bit of time, and it's conversations like this that help educate, and I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. This was a blast, and keep your pugs away from the toilet. So
love the analogy. Chase, I appreciate it. We'll chat real soon.
All right.
Thanks. Bye-bye.